On this girl's VK page, 2/3 of the published posts are photos of her little daughter, Sonechka. Here, the little girl is laughing and looking into the camera with her wide, radiant eyes, or gazing trustingly at her mom. And here's a funny picture. The little one is intently drinking from a bottle, lying in bed with her 2-year-old brother, who has the same kind of bottle. And the comically serious look in these photos radiates warmth and coziness, a close-knit, happy family. But this little girl is no longer here, and the cause of her death was not an illness or a tragic accident. But there are many more victims in this case. After all, this little girl's 2-year-old brother spent 2 whole days of his short life not being with his mom and dad, and not in a warm bed next to his smiling sister, but alone with a cold, lifeless little body that I tried unsuccessfully to wake up. And life has never been kind to the baby's mother either. But who's to blame here? Who's right? Tell us in the comments on the Strashnota channel. And today, a grim, heartbreaking case. Varvara Zerevtsova. She didn't know what a normal, complete family was, but she always dreamed of it. She was born on January 19th, 2001 in St. Petersburg. When Varyusha was just a year old, her mother gave her up to an orphanage behind government walls. Varya spent all her childhood and youth without family or loved ones. The girl didn't remember her parents, and the information she had about them was very limited. It is only known that the family was troubled. Her father died soon after Varya was born, and her mother became addicted to illegal substances and couldn't give her daughter a happy childhood. The orphanage staff were compassionate and tried to give the children the love and care they had missed out on. The girl was often praised, and people noted that she was a positive child who stood out among the others for her active attitude toward life and her energy. Varyush, you are really smart and you will achieve anything you want, the caregivers promised. I hope so, the girl agreed trustfully. Already a teenager, I can only rely on myself. But the conditions in which Varya was forced to grow up, of course, left their mark on her young soul. One of the caregivers remembers her childhood longing for family life. Even as a child, Varvara dreamed of creating a strong and happy family. Perhaps this was her way of making up for what she lacked. When I grow up, I will have a husband and children whom I will never leave, Varvara would simply tell the adults, and the caregivers would gently pat her on the head, sincerely believing that she would keep her word. Varvara's peers, however, had a somewhat different opinion of her. One of the girls from the orphanage who studied at the same time as Zerevtsova spoke about her classmates' oddities. Varya was always a bit in her own world, saying that no one understood her, that she was somehow special. Years went by, but Varvara kept trying to justify herself by saying she was special and misunderstood by everyone. She had already become a mother herself, faced life's difficulties, and experienced yet another betrayal in her life. At the same time, Varya, deprived of her home and family warmth, still had an example of a normal life right in front of her. Sometimes she saw how her classmates spent time with their parents. The thing is, the girl studied at an ordinary city school in St. Petersburg. There is a program for orphans that allows them to be sent to regular schools on an equal basis with children from ordinary families. She was noticed by the teachers when they talked about their student. The girl is so cheerful and optimistic even though her life is difficult. She doesn't envy anyone and tries to stand out with her talents and intelligence. Varya always wanted to prove herself, and in high school she volunteered to become a counselor at a children's camp. I really love working with kids, she said sincerely. To take care of them, to teach them new things. At that time she was still a teenager. And usually during this period people temporarily turn into baboons, and it's pretty hard to find common ground with them, but the school staff took the risk and didn't lose. Slim and fragile Varya, always neat with neatly braided hair, turned out to be an excellent leader and organizer. She worked passionately with children, was very easy to talk to and communicative. Later, one of the camp workers spoke enthusiastically about the young counselor, saying she had organizational skills and could easily find common ground with the children. Honestly, if I didn't know that Varvara grew up in an orphanage, I wouldn't have believed it. She's a friendly and very sociable girl. In 2019, Varya graduated from school, left the orphanage, and finally got her own place. The government provided her with housing, as is required for all orphans. It was a modest studio apartment on Tikukianskaya Street in the Pargolovo settlement of St. Petersburg. "What a beauty!" exclaimed the delighted girl as she entered the apartment for the first time and looked out onto the street. The thing is, the building was tall, 14 stories high, and the views from there were breathtaking. Varvara regularly posted photos of beautiful sunsets she watched from her window on social media. This was independent living. Everything is still ahead, so many plans and hopes for a happy future. But to provide herself with at least the basics, food, clothes, paying for utilities, she urgently needed to find a job. After all, as a recent orphanage graduate, she could only rely on herself. The girl wisely reasoned that she needed to feed herself now and also think about the future, so what should she do? Varya tried to enroll in the St. Petersburg State Institute of Culture, but her low scores on the Unified State exam let her down. And that's when her experience as a camp counselor came in handy. She went to work as a nanny for a family that lived next door. She seemed like a good girl, the couple discussed after some time. Hardworking and attentive, you could trust her with a child. Varvara really did a great job taking care of the child, and the grateful family later recommended her to other clients. Varya's personal life was also slowly getting better. Varya wasn't a classic beauty. She had large, somewhat rough facial features, but she had a nice figure. With her first paycheck, she bought herself heeled sandals, a red top, and a flowing sheer skirt. And in this outfit, she looked like a modern asshole, literally wrapped in scarlet sails. "I'll meet the best guy in the world," she dreamed, "and my family will be wonderful." Young men really did court the girl, but none of them could win her heart for a long time. Until the end of 2019, when Varya met Nikolai, he was a few years older, already 22. He is more mature, which means responsible, thought Varvara. At first, nothing foretold a great love. Kolya was an ordinary guy, with unremarkable looks, baggy clothes, and glasses. But somehow, he won the heart of a lonely girl. They started dating, and soon she realized that it was with this person she wanted to build the family of her dreams. A year later, in the fall of 2020, the couple had a very modest wedding. They celebrated at home, surrounded by their closest ones. Varya wasn't wearing white, but a red dress, and Kolya was in a regular t-shirt and simple pants. After the celebration, the newlyweds moved into Varvara's apartment. She continued working as a nanny, and Nikolai worked in sales. Despite busy schedules, they still spent time together, went for walks, and took trips out of town with friends. Judging by the photos the couple posted on social media, they were happy, always together, with smiles on their faces. However, the number of photos together sharply decreased in 2021. A crisis was brewing in the young couple's relationship. At that time, she bitterly wrote on her VK page, "When a person wants to, they pick up the phone, write, call, talk, or go somewhere, and if not, then they don't want anything at all." And the girl decided to take saving the family into her own hands, because ever since school she had skillfully resolved conflicts. 2 months after their quarrel, Varvara came to her husband with joyful news. "Honey, I'm pregnant." "That's good," Nikolai responded reservedly. In April 2022, the couple's first child, Petenka, was born, and now his photos have filled his mother's entire account. The little son smiles, eats, takes baths, gnaws on his crib, all those cute little things that are so dear to every mother's heart. However, with rare exceptions, Varya is alone with the baby in all the photos. "What do you expect?" Nikolai defended himself. "Who's going to feed us all if I don't work hard?" "But I wish you were around more often," his wife said. How can a boy grow up without his father's example? The husband insisted that he didn't have time to spend with the child, that he had to work a lot to support the growing family. And what about Varya? She really wanted to feel like she had a family and not feel lonely as before, but soon things got even worse. It turned out that her beloved husband was not staying late because he was busy with work, but simply because he was having a good time with his mistresses. And what hurt the most was that he started cheating right after their son was born. When Varya herself was in such euphoria from bringing a new life into the world, how could you? Cried Varya. It just happened, things got complicated, mumbled Kolya, but Varya still didn't want to break up the family. She herself grew up without a single close relative by her side, and that's why her husband meant the whole world to her. Even though he was so plain and had gained weight over several years of married life, he had become almost like family to her. Varvara's friends said that she simply turned a blind eye to Nikolai's infidelities. I think everything will work out, she told her friend. He'll just get it out of his system and settle down. People don't change, her friend replied. Why would he do anything if you accept everything as it is? And what choice do I have to kick him out? Then what, my son will grow up without a father? I know what that's like myself, and I don't want the same fate for Petya. I'm sorry, I know this is important to you, her friend said, hugging her. Just a month after Petya was born, Varvara wrote in her blog, where she sincerely shared all her feelings and thoughts, "Everything will be fine, I just need to forget everything and start over." In an attempt to strengthen the family she already cherished, the woman decided to have a second child. Not all of her acquaintances understood this decision, since the first child didn't help strengthen the marriage, but rather the opposite. Nevertheless, in April 2023, Varya gave birth to a girl who was named Sonia. I know, everything will be fine for us now, the young mother whispered into her baby's ear. And it seemed like everything really did return to normal. The couple spent a lot of time walking with the children. Kolya happily splashed around with his son at the beach, showed pictures on his phone to his tiny daughter, did, as he later said himself, what he could and what he knew how to do, and often tenderly hugged both of the little ones. Varya, who had gained a little weight after giving birth, was shy about her appearance, and in the midst of household chores she would forget to refresh her manicure or do her hair. And the family didn't have extra money for that anyway, but she didn't regret having her daughter. Something precious, not because of its cost, but because it's something you would be afraid to lose. That's what she wrote in July 2023 under a photo of her baby's tiny hand, and in August she posted some naive little poems. How wonderful it is to have a daughter, even if she's stubborn like her dad, just the same, but she's beautiful and smart, and in that, I guess it's my fault. And every night I pray, thank you, Lord, for my daughter. Varvara Zherebtsova was an ordinary girl, but with a somewhat childish attitude towards life, which is quite understandable since she didn't have many examples of adult relationships in front of her. She just really wanted to be good and kept trying, like in school, to stand out among everyone, tried to cook delicious meals by searching for original recipes, baked cakes herself for holidays, listened to Russian pop music, made spelling mistakes, and drew little ears and horns on herself and her friends in a very childish way. In the photo, she drew those same playful horns on herself and her daughter in one of the girl's last pictures. They were taken on New Year's, and little Sonechka had only about 2 weeks left to live. Besides family and daily life, Varvara's interests and aspirations were very simple. She was subscribed to groups about finds on VV and cheap cosmetics, and to countless public pages with primitive humor, and soon dating groups appeared in her subscriptions as well. After all, the renewed family idyll with Nikolai didn't last long. Of course, he started cheating again. He treated his wife coldly. Neither the children nor the comfort that Varya tried so hard to create could keep him. Because people at their core really don't change. And those who want to reform someone else don't change either. So it turns out that these people meet each other, and in the end, someone suffers while someone else plays the fool. In the fall of 2023, Nikolai practically stopped coming home, having moved in with yet another lover. Varvara reacted to this betrayal with resentment, writing in her blog, "People don't change, they just play the necessary role for a while for their own interests." So she finally realized, by the way, once again abandoned by someone close to her, she was left alone with 2 tiny children. You know, by that time it had been about a year and a half and Sonechka wasn't even 6 months old yet. It was a complete dead end. With 2 little kids in her arms, the young woman just couldn't find a job. Nikolai hardly helped the family with money, and the family survived only on the meager child benefits, which were barely enough for the most basic needs. Varvara's few friends noticed that her children were now deprived even of the simplest motherly care. One of them said, "I saw that the children wore hand-me-downs and were often untidy and dirty." Varvara replied that her husband was to blame for everything, that he didn't help her at all, allegedly beat her and drank. She insisted that he lived separately and was unfaithful, complained that she didn't have enough money, and basically lived only on social benefits. However, on social media, Varvara continued to present herself as a loving and caring mother. At the end of September, she wrote, "The most precious gifts are wrapped in a blanket and carried out of the maternity hospital." And at the same time, she admitted to her friends that she was very burdened by the forced seclusion and was tired of the children. But there's no one to leave them with since she's all alone. Soon a third child was added to the family. Unemployed Varya, completely out of desperation, started working as an hourly nanny. A neighbor, Popargolova, also a young mother named Lolita, would bring her daughter, who was the same age as Sonechka, to Varya's home for a few hours each day. Soon the girls became friends, and Lola would laugh cheerfully as she looked at photos of their children together, taken in Varya's apartment. "Oh God, my little bun is so serious compared to your smiling ones." Petya and Sonia really did look happy in the photos, but Varvara herself started to fall into a real depression because of all the life problems that suddenly piled up. If October went by relatively smoothly, then in November she started to be overwhelmed by a dark melancholy. November 25th on VK. She made a show of being happy that Sonechka turned 7 months old, wishing her to grow up healthy, beautiful, and the smartest. The only thing that raises concern is the little addition at the end of her wishes, and most importantly, obedient with 3 exclamation marks. Of course, all children can be fussy and can drive their parents up the wall. But for Varvara, who had no one to help her, it was especially infuriating and felt like being on an emotional roller coaster. A few days later, she awkwardly but sincerely swears her love for her children. "I will be happy no matter what, because I have 2 wonderful little ones by my side, and they are the reason to live. Yes, it's hard, yes, it hurts, but so what? Life doesn't end here. You have to keep going, no matter what." She repeated the phrase, "no matter what," several times in her letter. And, as her acquaintances say, around this time Zherebtsova's behavior began to cause serious concern among those around her. "It was in December 2023 we met in the city. She was acting strangely, not like she usually did, as if she was disconnecting from reality. I even thought maybe she was on something, and then she suddenly asked, 'Choose, who should I get rid of, my son or my daughter?' I was just standing there in shock, but Varya laughed and said it was a joke. The guess that an acquaintance was using illegal substances turned out to be correct. Varya later admitted to using them herself, justifying it by saying she was trying to numb the feeling of loneliness and despair. After her husband left, she followed the same path as her mother once did, and, as often happens, repeated her fate. With each passing day, Varvara sank deeper into a pit of black depression. The situation seemed hopeless, and it felt like her life was spiraling out of control. However, the young woman stubbornly tried to pretend that everything was fine and that she was coping, just as she did in school. In fact, she had always been cheerful and active, even if she was eaten up by sadness inside. On December 6, she summed up the year on her page, and it actually turned out almost positive, even though the year had been very difficult. "I want to say thank you to everyone who gave me experience. Thank you to those who were there for me and could always give me advice and support me at any moment. I am incredibly happy that I have 2 wonderful and beautiful little children." So, once again, she emphasized that she loves her children. And also, without mentioning his name, she thanked her husband for being in her life, for all the memories, emotions, and the time they spent together. By this point, Varya seemed to have already accepted Nikolai's departure and found the strength to express her gratitude and move on with her life. And shortly before New Year's, on December 25, she wrote again about her love for her daughter, a bit awkwardly, as always. Well, now you're 8 months old, you've grown so much, I love you. And she attached a funny photo of the little girl, who only had a few weeks left to smile. Sonechka didn't live to see her 9 months. 3 days later, the terrible chronology begins, the countdown of the last days. It all started on New Year's Day. Varya welcomed it completely exhausted. The only place where she could briefly hide from the noisy kids was the bathroom. The young woman relaxed in the warm water and enjoyed moments of peace and rest. However, after posting a photo where her thigh and knee peeked out from the bubbles, Varvara faced a wave of hate. People considered such a photo too vulgar for a young mother. Driven to the edge, Varya was very angry as she responded to the haters' comments. "And who asked for your opinion?" she asked. "Did everyone ask their mother?" Mother, when will I get to be myself? All her friends noted that lately she has been reacting too aggressively to criticism. Only Lolita supported Varya, the neighbor whose daughter she used to look after. These two women spent the last night of the year together, and of course with their children. The table was very modest. There was no money for a lavish feast, just potatoes, a little salad, tomatoes and cucumbers. Varya tried to decorate it, making little roses out of sausage, while Sonechka played with tangerines, which her loving mother arranged into the number 8 to mark her daughter's 8th month. Lola, laughing as always, praised her friend, "You're so creative," and Varya, like a schoolgirl, was proud that her efforts were appreciated. "Well, my friend, Happy New Year, and may new happiness come your way." The women raised a traditional toast as the chimes rang, and after the new year arrived, Varvara really did get a hint of new happiness. On January 8th, she took a photo of the kids with some smiling guy and captioned it, "This is mine," and the whole photo was surrounded by kiss and heart emojis. Apparently, this was her new boyfriend. His social media profile has now been deleted, and it's impossible to reliably identify the man. Back then, it seemed like life had given Varya hope for something bright. At the end of the tunnel, the children eagerly hugged their mother's new suitor, and he held the freshly bathed Sonechka wrapped in a towel on his lap. On January 19th, 2024, Varvara was supposed to turn 23 years old. She started preparing for the celebration a few days in advance, because for once she planned to get out of the house and have fun with her friends. "This black dress is the best choice," she thought, spinning in front of the bathroom mirror in her minimalist outfit. The ever-present Petya was getting underfoot, but Varya was used to it, since she was almost never without her children. On the morning of the 18th, she was pleased with the beautiful bouquet that Nikolai had sent to her home, and she made a slightly sarcastic comment when she posted a photo of the flowers. Haha. Does it ever happen that people mix up the birthdays of their exes? But still, thank you. It was at 9:19 in the morning, and it's important for us to remember this time. The rest of the morning didn't go well. As Varvara herself later said, she fed both children breakfast, and around 10 in the morning she tried to put them back to sleep so she could go see her new boyfriend. The older son fell asleep quickly, but the younger daughter was fussy. At first she didn't want to eat, then she didn't want to sleep. The young mother was already about to call a taxi, but because of her whining daughter, her whole plan was falling apart. "Yes, go to sleep, I'll be back soon," she hissed at the girl. "Let me finally get some rest too." But little Sonia just wouldn't let her mother go. Judging by Varvara's words, her patience ran out in less than half an hour. It was around this time that she posted a photo of the bouquet, and the fussy Sonia kept crying and crying. And then Varvara took a pillow. Later, she told the investigators about her actions. "So, when I couldn't get her to sleep again, something snapped in my head and I realized I couldn't stand her crying anymore. I took a pillow, walked up to the crib and put it on Sonia's head, then pressed down hard." But the monstrous crime and the sight of the lifeless little girl didn't spoil the young woman's mood at all. She wasn't frozen in shock at what she'd done, she just left the dead Sonya lying there. Sonya wasn't even 2 years old, and she, as if nothing had happened, went off to have fun. As it turned out later, the boy wasn't asleep and saw his mom take his sister's life. And who did you leave the kids with? Varvara's friends asked her, but she just brushed off all their questions and kept partying, trying to lose herself in a drunken haze. All this happened late in the evening, even though her original plan was to leave the kids alone for just a few hours, not a whole week. One of the people at that party later shared his memories of Zherebtsova's behavior with journalists. She didn't mention the children at all and behaved as usual. But other guests recalled that Varvara mentioned a friend named Anzelika, saying that the children were left with her. In the modern world, social networks are very helpful in tracking and understanding the chronology of events, particularly VK in our case, and the timeline of Varvara's next days is as follows. Closer to 4 p.m., she posted a photo of her daughter with an aggressive caption, "This is mine. If anyone doesn't like it, message me privately." And a few minutes later, she posted a photo of herself in a funeral black dress, without any comments. She already knew that her daughter was dead. After sleeping off a wild party, Zherebtsova began to realize that only one child was waiting for her at home, but even then, the mother was in no hurry to see him. The birthday celebration lasted for 2 whole days, and by Saturday, Varvara had managed to meet both her friend and her ex-husband. And as she later admitted, she was using not only alcohol. At 1:30 in the morning on January 20th, she posted a strange photo where she is standing in the embrace of death. Someone in a skull mask is looking at the camera, and Varya, hugging him, is hiding her face. But she still wasn't in a hurry to go home, continuing to party hard. Eventually, she got herself together and went home. Only by midday on January 20th, she was with some new acquaintances who were planning to continue the fun party at a friend's apartment. When they entered the apartment, the guests were left speechless by what they saw. Sitting on the floor was Petya, red from screaming and crying, pointing at the couch with his finger. One of the new friends who arrived that day with Varvara later recounted, "So we arrive, we go into the apartment. And I think there's no need to say what we saw there. It was the completely purple body of a little girl who was 9 months old." And another person who was also present said in an interview, "She cut off the oxygen, threw her, left her between the couch and the radiator." And so for 3 days Petya sat alone with his dead sister, and Zherebtsovev's friend remembered those terrible days with these words. Varvara took her daughter's life and left her lying in the crib for 3 days, while she went off to celebrate her birthday. It's unclear where and with whom. I can't imagine how the boy lived. They found the girl on the couch. She wasn't breathing. However, by that time, Varvara had already come up with a plan that, as she thought, would let her get away with it. She called the police, making it look like she had left the children with a friend, and when she returned home, she found her daughter dead. Wailing and fake crying while talking to the emergency dispatcher, the woman spoke incoherently, "My friend disappeared. I couldn't reach her by phone. It looks like she left, leaving the children alone, and maybe she did something to Sonya. I couldn't wake her up, she's already cold." According to her, when she came home, she saw her son next to his sister's body. He was probably trying to wake up or move the motionless little girl. Police officers and an ambulance were sent to the address, but when the doctors arrived, all they could do was confirm the death of the younger child. At the same time, according to eyewitnesses, the mother was behaving very strangely. While the apartment and the girl's body were being examined, Zherebtsova was texting someone on her phone and watching videos, looking bored. "We love you, remember you, mourn you, may you have soft clouds," she cynically wrote at 7 p.m. when the body of the daughter whose life she had taken had already been taken to the morgue. This post was accompanied by photographs. Sonya, alive, laughing, and still just an infant, and a recent New Year's photo with those very tangerines arranged in the shape of an 8, the number of months not allotted by fate but by her mother. The comments section was filled with condolences, while at the same time the police were closely watching Varvara's actions. The opinions of several detectives about what was happening quickly aligned. She didn't seem like a grieving mother, not when it came to Sonia's body. At first they didn't find any signs of violent death, but later they sent the body for examination. They reviewed the footage from the surveillance cameras in the entrance. There was no one on the recordings who looked like Varvara's friend, who supposedly abandoned the children to their fate that day, nor were there any other suspicious individuals. The apartment itself was messy and dirty. Maybe the mother didn't care for the children as much as she told everyone. And Varvara's neighbor readily told the investigators, "We often saw this mother drunk, almost all the time, and the children were completely neglected." Zhereptsova broke quickly. Just 2 days later, she admitted that she had lied about her friend and told how everything really happened. By that time, the forensic experts had already determined that the younger child died as a result of mechanical asphyxia. "She was getting in my way crying," Zhereptsova said coldly during the interrogation, realizing that she could no longer deny it. If you want even more videos, go to Boosty if you're from Russia and Patreon if you're not from Russia. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube. The links are below the video. On January 22, the negligent mother was detained and a criminal case was opened under the article that provides for liability for depriving a minor or another person who is obviously helpless to the perpetrator of life. Later, 2 more articles of the criminal code were added: leaving a child in danger and failure to fulfill parental duties in raising a minor. The next day, the woman was officially charged with all these offenses. At the court hearing where this took place, Varvara remained silent, agreeing to everything. Shocked friends and acquaintances of Zhereptsov still kept leaving outraged comments under Varvara's last post with a photo of the baby. One friend wrote, "Oh my God, how could you do this? And yet you always acted like a good mother whom no one understands in this world." And everyone turned away. Another follower spoke even more harshly about Varvara, and some people expected something different from her. "You all knew what kind of person she was, right? What kind of person was she?" A lot is revealed about her by the last status she posted on her page. "Everything turned out not the way I wanted. I'm tired. I'm fed up with everything." Actually, instead of fed up, there was a terrible, awful curse word. And here are the official dry lines from the statement of the St. Petersburg prosecutor's office. Leaving her son, who was not yet 2 years old, in the apartment without supervision, food or water, the defendant went to visit friends, where she claimed that she had left the children with her friend Anzelika. The bureaucratic style of criminal proceedings indifferently describes what disappointment and fatigue led to: the loss of one child's life and an absolutely careless attitude toward her other firstborn. Even if he later forgets those terrible days and hours, the psychological trauma will most likely remain in his mind forever. Immediately after the arrest of Varvara Zhereptsova, social services handed over the minor Petya to his father, Nikolai. According to friends, the news of his daughter's death was a real shock for the man. However, not all acquaintances assessed his condition that way. One of them, outraged by what happened, wrote, "Where was this so-called father? At the moment when she got drunk and took the child's life, he abandoned them and didn't care who the children were left with." Varvara herself now faced up to 20 years in prison, and the trial of the child killer lasted more than a year. During the hearings, Zhereptsova suddenly changed her mind and did not plead guilty to the charge of taking a life, asking to have her actions reclassified as causing death by negligence. She claimed that yes, she was angry and did hit her daughter, but she definitely did not intend to take her life. The investigation insisted that the woman deliberately placed a blunt object on the girl, covering her face and airways, blocking her access to oxygen, and pressed down with adult force. Later, Zhereptsova again admitted that the object was a pillow, and even demonstrated how she placed it on the child's face, but insisted she had no intention to kill. The court, however, stated that depriving a helpless child of life was not an act of negligence. The press service of St. Petersburg commented on the actions of the unfortunate mother as follows: Due to suddenly arising personal animosity, as well as with the intention of freeing herself from the obligations of raising the child, she placed the young child's back on the sofa, and then, using a pillow, pressed the victim's head with sustained force at least once, causing her asphyxiation. In general, the story of Varvara Zhereptsova is a story of deep trauma, loneliness, and the collapse of all hopes. Her whole life was filled with longing for a normal family, which she never had. Growing up in an orphanage, she dreamed from childhood of having a husband and children whom she would never abandon, trying to make up for what she herself had been deprived of. She entered life determined to be good, diligent, and positive, which was noted by both her caregivers and teachers. However, behind this cheerful facade was an immature, underdeveloped personality who had never seen a healthy model of relationships and was unable to cope with adult problems. Her marriage to Nikolai was the embodiment of her dream, but when he started cheating and eventually left, her fragile world collapsed. Left alone with two little children without money or support, she found herself trapped. Varvara fell into depression and started using illegal substances. And worst of all, she began to see her children not as objects of love, but as a source of endless stress and obstacles to her personal freedom and happiness. Her latest posts on social media are a cry of despair, exhaustion, and growing irritation. The moment of taking life became the culmination of this inner breakdown, when she saw crying as an unbearable obstacle. Her behavior after the crime, cynical, emotionless, with an attempt to cover up the traces and continue having fun, demonstrates complete moral degradation and alienation from her maternal essence. Her daughter Sonechka became the most innocent and tragic victim in this case. At just 8 months old, she was absolutely helpless and completely dependent on her mother, whose irritation and fatigue she could not understand. Her life was cut short by the very person who was supposed to be her main protector and support. Her death at the hands of her mother is an act of monstrous betrayal and cruelty. Varvara's son Petya became the second survivor, but a deeply traumatized victim. He became a hostage to a situation he could neither understand nor escape. After spending 2.5 days in a locked apartment with the body of his deceased sister, he experienced psychological shock, the consequences of which will likely stay with him for the rest of his life. He witnessed the loss of life and was left completely alone with this horror, being too young to help or call for help. Nikolai, Varvara's husband, is also a key figure in this drama. Although he did not commit the crime directly, his role in the chain of events cannot be underestimated. His repeated infidelities, emotional coldness, and eventual departure from the family left Varvara in a state of complete helplessness and despair. He shifted the entire burden of caring for 2 children onto his psychologically unprepared and immature wife, providing her with neither material nor moral support. His irresponsibility and infidelity became one of the key factors that pushed Varvara to the edge. Although he has now taken on the care of his surviving son, his own contribution to the family tragedy is not diminished by this. The verdict was announced on March 20, 2025 without cameras or journalists present, but one camera was still smuggled into the courtroom. Upon seeing it, Zhereptsova began to scream frantically. However, the reporters managed to capture a few seconds, and in the footage, you can see the woman's completely expressionless, impassive face, not daring to look up at those around her. After the trial was over, the prosecutor on the case, Alexander Sanaev, informed the public with the following words. She was found guilty of taking the life of her young daughter, of leaving her little son in danger, and of failing to properly fulfill her parental duties in raising her children. Infanticide has long been considered the most serious crime. For a mother to take the life of her child was a terrible sin, for which in the Middle Ages the guilty woman would be burned or beheaded. In the 21st century, for the murder of her daughter, Varvara Zhereptsova was sentenced to 14 years in a general regime penal colony. A strict regime is not provided for women in Russia. In addition, Zhereptsova was ordered to pay a fine of 100,000 rubles, which she will have to pay in installments from the money that prisoners earn for their labor. Nikolai Zhereptsov, who is now raising his son, is, according to his friends, much more responsible than his ex-wife, although he once left his family for a mistress. Nikolai refused to accept the apologies from the mother of his children and does not maintain any contact with her. The man has closed his VK account from prying eyes, but it's visible that his profile picture is a children's toy, and the background says, "Death is always free. Zhereptsova may still be released from the colony when her son turns 16. Will he want to see the one who gave him life and took it away from his sister?" That's a big question, just like whether Varvara herself will be able to live a normal life or only with the burden of her heavy guilt, and how she will perceive freedom after her release. It turns out that Zhereptsova will spend most of her life in state institutions. For 17 years it was an orphanage, and then 14 years in a penal colony. And she only had 5 years of independent life and freedom, during which she managed to give life to 2 new people, and cruelly take one of them away. And what do you think about this case? Write in the comments, leave likes or dislikes, and watch other videos on the channel while they're still available.